So this is my reading, reflection, and commentary on the Proverbs. I'm in chapter 30, currently on verse 12. Now I just finished my previous recording on part 2. This is part 3. And so I suppose I can begin this with a prayer. That's our usual procedure of late. Dear Lord, I thank you that I can be here. I thank you for this day. There's something important that has been on my mind, and I find it strange, especially in the context of the last verse as we were talking about curses. There's something about a particular state of mind that can feel quite negative, that can be quite limiting, that can cause a sense of fatigue, anguish perhaps at times. And when thoughts of goodness, or a desire rather, to come to that place of goodness, begin to occur to the mind, again, continuing in this unfortunate state of mind, it is some of the most difficult thoughts, most unfortunate thoughts to come about, that the mind begins to attribute negative emotion to that very locus of goodness and attention that you provide. And I pray that this experience, although I know it will find me again, is something that I am able to leave, to find, for the curse to find you. The curse in this situation is that the words no longer, or maybe not no longer, but fail to produce the appropriate feelings. And it is incumbent upon me, when this does happen, to reinvigorate these words. When prayer becomes a chore, or the thought of you becomes something that a non-believer or somebody who doesn't wish to attend much to these matters might feel, that it is, again, a burden, or it is something that is draining, rather than something that is uplifting and good. And also I think that I would not wish to say that every time I wish to commune with you, God, that I expect some sort of uplifting experience, or that I wish to feel some euphoria. I think there's a lot of balance that goes into this. It goes into establishing a more firm relationship with you. And I pray that I can maintain this sense of discipline throughout my days. And with this I pray in Jesus' name, amen. So beginning now with verse 12. There's a generation that are pure in their own eyes, and yet is not wasted from their filthiness. So we're coming off a verse that reads, there is a generation that curses their fathers and does not bless their mother. That itself coming off a verse stating, accuse not a servant unto his master, lest he curse you, and you be found guilty. And also I should mention that chapter 31 is chapter 30 is an interesting one, because we begin it with a dialogue, and there's a particular narrator. If anyone is interested, I would refer you back to part 1. But I think that there is a a continuity between these verses. The fact that we just finished discussing the nature of the curse, how they can bleed through a generation, and how it can disrupt the organization of a society. There's a generation that are pure in their own eyes. The implication here being that within their own eyes is a matter of their perspective, and that it is not actually the way that it is. That it is the case that they are mistaken about their sense of purity. Purity, an interesting term. There are various levels in which the mind can comprehend purity. The purity of mind, it's very difficult for me to approach. The purity of form, I think it's easier for me to understand. Now, when I think about a circle, and I grab a penny off of my desk, I can appreciate quite readily the exactness of this circle. There's a certain purity to that, the quality of this object. There's also a certain purity, I think, that's associated with the lettering that is written along it. A certain purity, perhaps, of the metal that is composed of this object. That if we take any particular avenue, dimension for which we choose to measure an object by its qualities, we could take its circularness, and by that alone, I can see and can appreciate what the pure sense of circularness is. Now, perhaps not completely, but it doesn't necessarily have to be complete. I'm not sure what a complete idea or conceptualization, observation of the quality of circularness actually is. But looking at something that is quite circular relative to many things that are curved and unified in a semicircular manner, and yet are not perfect circles, this coin certainly helps me with a reference. Now, in the same manner, it may be difficult to understand what it exactly would mean for a generation to be pure. We can both look at and observe generations of old that have been particularly successful or have had a particularly admirable spirit. We can begin to form our idea of what that form of a pure generation looks like, even though they may not occupy the absolute purity in and of themselves. And I think it's partially because of this that even among a generation of great merit, if there is going to be this general sentiment of purity among them, there is danger for that hubris, for the attention to be drawn to the mirror more than it is drawn towards righteous pursuits. And because it is drawn to the mirror and drawn to the superficial, it will fail to permeate to those deeper levels of mind, of heart, of experience in general. There's a generation that are pure in their own eyes, and yet is not wasted from their filthiness. it is by their superficiality that they are unable to see the aspects of their being that is less than pure. Now, if I took this penny and I somehow seared this into my mind as the only way in which a circle could be conceived, this form of the circle would be polluted by other elements. Those elements in and of themselves I can admire. Again, the printing, the material, but all of this other stuff would also serve to pollute my idea or my understanding of circularness. A better example probably would be to grab a quarter, because a quarter has uneven surfaces at its margins. And as I got particular about the form of this circle, my mind would immediately go to these sort of perforated edges, and it would go towards that discontinuity of composition between two different metals put together. And it is because I failed to recognize the impurities that I would have a poor understanding of what circularness actually is. Now, it happens to be the case that I picked something that is actually quite a good form for a circle, that of a quarter. It's quite precise. But in the case of an object that was a poor circle, just like we were discussing here as a poor generation, and I took that and I put that at the highest, then there would be no doubt or no wonder why my idea of what a circle could be would be severely diminished. And thereby my hopes, my aspirations, and the very society that I live in, I think, would begin to reflect the same, for the standard is low. There is a generation, oh how lofty are their eyes, and their eyelids are lifted up. So this verse seems to be like a change in tone to a degree. We're coming off of two generations, one that has cursed their fathers, one that has failed to bless their mothers, one that has viewed themselves in a light of purity, in a form of purity, but that has distracted them from their own failures. But now there's a generation who, perhaps after experiencing all of that, their eyes are lifted up beyond that poor sense of purity for which they, unfortunately, proposed upon themselves. They recognize the importance of familial relations. And they do this because they have found a form that is greater, one that is beyond them. Even if it is an idea of a form that is beyond them, they continue to strive for things that are greater. The definition of lofty is of an imposing height, of wool and other textiles, thick and resilient. And one of the first things that I'd like to explore is the difference between the eyes and then the eyelids, because it mentions both. And it's probably not redundant. There may not be any profound significant meaning, but nonetheless I think it might be interesting to explore it symbolically and see where we get. Oh, how lofty are their eyes, and their eyelids are lifted up. So we have, in the case of the eyes, without the lids, let's say, it's more of a instrumental piece to that equation. The eye is the thing that takes in the information. It's also probably the thing here that will symbolize directed attention, maybe. That there is this willful desire to look up. But then there's a layer on top of that. Well, what if the eyelids are closed? What if they are open at varying degrees? Well, it would be possible that if the eyes are closed, despite where the eyes are looking, it may not see. So that's an interesting distinction. We can have concern, attention in a particular direction, and yet if we are not paying attention to our attention, then we're not going to meet the purpose. That lofty striving will fall flat. It will fail. Now, the other important thing here, the other interesting thing, is the thread between these verses. There is a generation that are pure in their own eyes, and yet is not washed from their filthiness. The verse before that, there is a generation that cursed their father and does not bless their mother. I know I've mentioned it before, but we are going through the cycle. Now this generation is looking upward. They are sick of the generation prior. They're sick of, I don't want to say their inheritance, but to a degree probably, I would imagine that they would be affected by this. And this happens to be quite an interesting verse to encounter now in 2025 in the United States, where I live. We are living in such a bizarre, not only political landscape, but cultural landscape. Technologically speaking, we are on the verge of something strange, different, something that will change us all, surely. And yet, where we stand now, it's difficult for me to say. How exactly life would be if I had grown up without the internet. It has become such a part of our lives. I came to have a relationship with it when I was young, certainly not to the degree that it is now. But the children now that are going to grow up, and the ones that are of teen years now, they have grown up with quite sophisticated technological tools, devices to communicate with each other, and all of the various social applications that connect people but also pervert their attention. There are many things in flux. There are many things that have been exposed, that have been attributed to particular generations. When I think about my generation, the millennial generation, I think of verse 12, that purity generation, or at least that they believe that they are so, and yet is not washed from their filthiness. This may be a few generations, perhaps. I'm not sure how the next ones will be, but there are elements, though, in every generation where you see the goodness that they possess. There is a generation whose teeth are as swords, and their jaw teeth as knives, to devour the poor from off of the earth, and the needy from among men. So at first glance, we have another generation that is doing positive things. Well, hopefully. The word devour is kind of insidious. There is a generation whose teeth are as swords, and their jaw teeth as knives. How could we understand this? What is the symbolism here behind the teeth? If we think about the purpose of the teeth, they are there to ground down nutrients, ground down food so that it may nourish the body. It's to make something acceptable. It's also a tool to grab and to tear, and perhaps for more violent affairs, the teeth can be seen to puncture, to wound. There is a generation whose teeth are as swords. So the symbolism here of fighting, of being an image of a warrior comes to mind that would wield a sword. That they're going out to attack. Their jaw teeth as knives. And perhaps there is a reference here to the mouth, as much like the eyes have this connotation of attention. I think the mouth is quite similar. This is the place where we articulate speech. Maybe not explicitly or literally in that sense, but there is that association of the movement of the jaw with the production of speech. And so both of these things together, I think, mean that there is a concreteness of action, and there is a concerted effort. Again, there's a attentive appointedness that is directing this behavior. But then comes to devour the poor from off of the earth. Now this can go either way. It can be in the sense of a state being quite authoritarian, and although they are ridding the citizenry, productive citizenry, of that homelessness, they are also committing grave crimes against the human soul by murdering them or putting them into prison indefinitely. Now, the more positive side of that is that the idea, the form of poverty, is being eradicated through righteous means. Now, this may be a stretch, but in the context of the poor being the receivers of the swords that are the teeth of these people, there's an image that comes of eating them. If they're eaten, there is then the concern of the host that has eaten the poor. And what does that mean? Are they inheriting the poverty for their nutrition? Or are they breaking up that negativity? And now these people are becoming food for the broader whole again. That is the society. That their poverty is conquered not by the destruction of them, but by the transformation of them. I think that the potential path or road that this verse suggests is multifaceted and is not necessarily limited to one or the other. Both stand as they are. The horse leech has two daughters, crying, "Give, give." There are three things that are never satisfied. Yeah, four things, say not. It is enough. Now there's a colon there, and I'll read to the next. The grave and the barren womb, the earth that is not filled with water, and the fire that says not, it is enough. So where to begin with a verse like this? The horse leech. Now, I'm not sure exactly what that means. I'll have to do some looking, but by first glance I would have to imagine that, at least what comes to mind, is a literal leech that sticks onto the neck of the horse and sucks its blood. Now, I have done some digging, and I believe that this is the case, that it is referring to an actual leech. But of course here the leech is a symbol. A leech has this, what would one say? It's a taker. It may symbolize greed, perhaps. If it takes too much, it will burst. but also it is a guest that is unwelcome. Of leeches that find themselves on man or on a horse, I think both species don't actively go out and wish to have their blood taken by some other creature. And I think I used too nice of a term there as guest. It is a stranger and a thief. So we have the body, this is the horse, and then we have the leech, the stranger and also thief that wishes to take from the body. Now the leech has 2 daughters. Now I think since it mentions that there are 2 daughters and not 2 sons, this is important. The first thing that I think about then is that these 2 leeches are of the same kind. So they're going to be horse leeches. They're going to return as these strange thieves to the horse or to the next generation of horses, whatever. The daughters, being the feminine component, are going to be the ones that receive, the ones that take, the ones that afford the next generation. And they are crying, "Give, give." What's interesting is that the first "give" is capitalized, and the second "give" is lowercase g. I'm not sure why that would be. Why there would be a capital "give." Perhaps it's capital for emphasis. That there is this, like we were talking about earlier with greed, there's this excessive desire for that blood. And that first "give" is expressive, it's angry, it is demanding. And the second "give" is more of the needy sort, of the impoverished. There are 3 things that are never satisfied. 4 things say not. It is enough. So how cryptic, how fascinating that there is the second part of this verse seems to be unrelated, but we do have 3 things. We have the mother, mother horse leech, and then the 2 daughter horse leeches. So there are 3 of these now, and they are never satisfied because they are greedy. They are the strangers and the thieves that keep on taking. And then it goes immediately into verse 16, which is a continuation of 15, separated by a colon. It is giving us there are 4 things. So it's interesting here. We'll have to do some thinking. The grave and the barren womb is the first thing. The earth that is not filled with water is the second. Okay, so I guess there are 3 things here. And the fire that says not. It is enough. So we have an embedded symbolism here. We have greed that has multiplied. And we have identified 3 things for whatever reason. 3 things for which the expression of greed, perhaps as it goes through time, we were just speaking about generations earlier. Now we are speaking of the leech that has 2 daughters going to a successive generation. There's an indication that the daughters, like their kind, will be greedy. They will be these thieves and latch on and take without permission. And so the grave is similar in that regard, as looking at it as almost like an agent, its purpose. It will always take from us. It'll take from each and every one of us. Eventually we will be reabsorbed back into the natural process of things. And I should say that we are continually being reabsorbed, but constantly being remade, at least. The grave will have its day with us. The grave and the barren womb. Now, I pause for a moment because I think that there are ways in which we can, there are ways in which I think this verse can be split up different ways. And also in the last verse, there's an indication of 4 things, even though it seems like it's saying, 3 things are enough, don't say another, for this greed. But also at the same time, when we get down into verse 16, the grave, semicolon, and the barren womb, semicolon, the earth that is not filled with water, semicolon, and the fire that says not. That's 4 things following those semicolons. But at the same time, we have the grave and the barren womb. We have the earth that is not filled with water, and the fire that says not. It is enough. And that's 2 things. Perhaps the 2 things would satisfy the daughter, but it's not enough to satisfy the last part, or the previous part of that verse. So, perhaps we'll come back to that pattern in a moment, but the grave, we've spoken of, and the barren womb. Again, going back to that idea of greed, but also of a creature that always must exist in this posture of taking, from the living. Now, there are many creatures, I think it could be said, that do the same. We are creatures that do the same. We take from the living to sustain ourselves. In fact, we do it at an expense that is higher than the leech. But the leech, for whatever reason, as a matter of their existence, it seems that relationship of latching on to the living and taking, in a symbolic way, life from it as it participates in life, perhaps there's meaning there, perhaps there is minimal meaning there. But the leech lives quite simply relative to other animals. I suppose this is where the important bit might come in. That their purposes are limited to reproduction and this perpetual greedy, thieving occupation. And it gives them that appearance of being greedy and never being satisfied. So when we think of things that are never satisfied, like our greedy, symbolic representations, considering the barren womb, considering the woman that does not have children, we are considering something that is never satisfied. A purpose, perhaps, that is never satisfied. In the modern era, we have an an interesting new relationship to, different relationship to the marriage and childbearing. There are many women today that are choosing not to have children for the sake of their careers. So my apologies, but today is a new day. It is a Monday evening. And so I'd like to begin this with a prayer. So, dear Lord, I thank you for this day, and I thank you that I can be here. I thank you that as is often, I thank you that I have this time to reflect, to bring myself down from that place of frustration, of pent-up stress, a place that I can come to shape my perspective, to widen my perspective, and to limit my own self-importance. Of late, there have been many feelings. I suppose there are always feelings, and the desire deep within me wishes to have positive feelings all of the time, and of course that's not practical. It is not something that we are able to constantly, continually afford. But despite times that are less than positive, times that bring some difficulty, I'm thankful that these times come to an end. And throughout all of these experiences, despite how one day may feel completely foreign and different to that of another, sometimes good, sometimes not, that in the end, the experience that I have reflecting and participating with you in mind brings everything together. Again, it's a matter of widening my perspective. And for this I thank you, and for this I pray in Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so continuing where we left off last time, I think last time I was talking about the second point. We discussed the grave, moved on to the barren womb. And I just finished with the thought of the sort of a thought about contemporary America and our changing demographics. I myself don't have any children, and so I'm in this category of that particular generation that has not found a partner to continue on the generations. And from what I understand, this is going to have an effect, a large effect, on the markets and on our social systems. But anyway, that is not necessarily the point of this verse. So I want to go over real quick, reading the two verses that we are on, and recenter. The horse leech has 2 daughters, crying, "Give, give." There are 3 things that are never satisfied. Yet 4 things say not, "It is enough." The grave and the barren womb, the earth that is not filled with water, and the fire that says not, "It is enough." I want to spend a little bit more time talking about the barren womb, or at least reflecting on the significance of a state of never being satisfied and the barren womb. I think there's a parallel here to what I had mentioned in the prayer. I mentioned the state of negative emotion, and that the heart seems to always desire this place where things are satisfactory, that there is a state of satisfaction. And judging how to bring about such a state, or understanding what such a state might feel like or looks like, I think is often quite difficult. And one can drive themselves mad trying to discover it or to feel it. There are plenty of poor roads to discover and to go down in respect to that type of satisfaction. Now, I can't say that I understand what a sense of true satisfaction looks like, or feeling truly fulfilled, what that might feel like. I know what elements of it feel like. I know what elements of satisfaction feel like. And I know what elements of fulfillment feel like. But in this way, there is, and perhaps this is a defect in my experience, there is a way in which the understanding of the element, but not understanding the constant, or maybe the state of satisfaction or fulfillment, there's a sense that this absence or lacking breeds a kind of desire for more of what they think they know, more of what the pieces of the whole they think they possess. And I know that I'm guilty sometimes of trying to find myself of a place greater, of a state of satiation much greater than I currently possess. And although I don't necessarily think that striving and discipline is bad, it's quite the opposite, actually. I think that they are virtuous things. However, there is a way in which our striving can lead to greed, just like we see here with the horse leech. And there's I think there's a fine line, there's a fine argument between accepting and being satisfied with what we have, while also being tempered and committed to change and to growth. Comparing or contrasting that to a mindset of perpetual denial for the sake of something that is greater, like an addict denies their current state, their current mental state or whatever, physical state, for the next high. That it really doesn't matter at some point about the drug anymore. It is just about getting to a place that is more full, that is a place that is higher, and that becomes insatiable. The very goal of trying to achieve that heightened level is impossible. There are things that are never satisfied, the barren womb. So again, the point of the womb is for that reason of childbearing. It is to accept the seed and to have life develop and grow. And there's something to be said about something that has some purpose that never fulfills it. Now, there are plenty of reasons why this might not happen in the sense of the womb, why a woman might not get pregnant. I don't mean to speak ill of these situations. But regardless of what the situation is, regardless of the intent of the individual, I think at some level there is a way in which an empty vessel that we carry so intimately, so closely as a part of ourselves, for it not to be used, causes a degree of dejection, causes a degree of denial of purpose, and lacking in meaning. Thankfully, meaning can come to us in many ways, but no doubt to focus on such a thing would lead us to that conclusion. The grave and the barren womb, the earth that is not filled with water. So in this case, a highly symbolic illustration. The earth that is not filled with water. So what can we say of the earth? Now, the earth occupies that space of information, as all things of substance do. It is a particular type of information. What's important is how it is organized. And it is organized, we can say, in a purposeful manner, but not purposeful in the way that we would imagine life to be purposeful. Goal-directed. It has a basic material substructure. This basic material substructure is enough to afford quite sophisticated forms of life and forms of mind. So it is that environment, that soil, through which the soul can breathe new life. Now we say when it is filled with water, in one sense we can imagine how vital water is to supporting life on Earth. We can take it the other direction and think about water in terms of its qualities. We say that it is liquid, that it flows, that it is difficult to control. It can have a lot of force and power behind it. It is chaotic. But it is also something that is nourishing. Something of a necessity for life. The earth itself, on its surface at least, the importance of water to the soil, to the environment, cannot be understated. And a dry earth, an earth that is not filled with water, is always a place that is wanting. We can also think about it in terms of, I suppose, think about it in terms of the particular elements. If water is a necessity for life, we think about the environment that is necessary to create mind. Without water, mind would not be. And so we have this experience of material, non-purposeful material, in the way that the human being or biological life is purposeful. And because of this, there is that lacking of the next step, let's say, or of a more complex form of organization of information. It remains in this stagnant state, as so many planets in our solar system do. without life, without meaning. And the fire that says not, it is enough. We just had a raging fire in California that destroyed many homes. And it is a strong symbol of greed, that of the fire that continues to take, but is not satisfied with how much it destroys. The eye that mocks at his father, and despises to obey his mother, the ravens of the valley shall pick it out, and the young eagles shall eat it. Another verse that is rich in symbolism. So I think it's important here to stress the organ of the eye, how fundamental that is to who we are as human beings. How strong of a perceptual organ it is, fundamental to our own perceptions of our environment, but also fundamental to the way in which we communicate with each other, between human beings, but also between animals in the animal kingdom. The eyes are quite an expressive part of us. And I think about my own experience, and I think about the ways in which I view things, the light under which I view them, where my attention goes, why it goes where it is. And the inner thoughts, although I find at times I'm thankful that my thoughts are my own, I also, as I think about it now, there's a sense in which I feel that I've betrayed my duty towards proper attention, to look upon people, or perhaps situations, in a positive light, and to push contempt as far away from myself as I can. In my weaker moments, I find that what my eyes see is the worst in people, and perhaps the worst in myself. The eye that mocks. There's a sense of belittling in the behavior of mockery. Within mockery, there is a degree of wickedness, and I think the evil spirit shows its head here. Evil spirit in the sense that of things that we can identify with absence, or with the tendency to draw towards absence of this sort. The mockery leads us to contempt. And contempt is a feeling that a person or a thing is beneath consideration, that it is worthless, deserving of scorn. Scorn is another term that comes up often in the Proverbs. It is the feeling or belief that someone or something is worthless or despicable. Again, contempt. So there's this back and forth between these two words, contempt and scorn. But I think that this is an evil thread, or an evil spirit, we can say, because the word worthless points towards absence, of having no real value or use. Now, it's not complete absence, of course, because a thing can still be identified even if we consider it to be worthless. I can go outside and I can grab a pile of dirt and hold it in my hand, and I can say that it is worthless. It doesn't mean anything to me. It's not valuable to me. And in a way that's true. And there's a way in which we can follow certain contexts and say that there is little value to relating to people in certain ways. But at the fundamental level, when we are mocking a person, we are considering, when we are not trying in the spirit of camaraderie, because sometimes I think there's a type of mockery in which there is this sense of belittling that is meant to actually draw one closer in a non-serious manner, poking at the ego as a strange, perhaps juvenile, but also perhaps in one way sophisticated way of bringing a person down, but then also in some sense bringing a person up. Now that might be confusing, and I may be thinking about a particular example here in my mind that I'm reluctant to share, but maybe I'll just say this, that in my experience, I have this tendency of, I'm not sure if I can call it mockery, but it's a type of joking, let's say, a type of banter in which I poke at somebody until they realize that I'm having fun with them so they can play along with the game. Not quite mockery, but there's an element, I suppose, of that. Certainly it can be taken that way. And if it's taken that way, I know that I have to correct something. But sometimes I feel that this banter can go a little bit too far, and sometimes it's difficult to understand exactly when to draw back. But I say that just to square the circle in my mind so I don't have to be distracted thinking about it, my potential missteps there. But going back to the topic of worthlessness, there's a way in which true mockery, pointing at certain fundamentals about an individual and saying that perhaps the individual themselves are completely worthless, that they have no value in society. I think that this mindset is born of an evil spirit. As I've mentioned, I think that this tends towards absence, even though it may not be immediately clear. If we tend to view human beings as hollow vessels, just a meat bag with no purpose, then we are heavily self-absorbed. We do not necessarily desire that orientation, that fellowship among man or one's fellows, and that every relationship has this sense of hollowness or superficiality, in which the relationship is just bonded by one party's desire for their selfish gratification. Conceit comes to mind. So, the eye that mocks his father. So if we think about that fundamental relationship between, in my case, let's say a son and a father. If I were to mock my father, what would that mean? But maybe first let's talk about the fundamentalness of the relationship. In a symbolic sense, we understand that we have the necessity of a father and a mother to produce an offspring. They come together in this union to produce a soul, essentially. At least ideally, to produce a soul, to produce an individual. What is required is the seed, but also the soil in order for that to grow. And of course the productive environment for which it will be nourished and strengthened. If we imagine that the generative force that had planted the seed and the soil that had nurtured that seed to bring it up, in one way we understand that there is difference by the new being as being separate, of having its own identity. But there's also a way in which this being is a part of that original experience of unity between the mother and the father. And while this may not necessarily translate in the mind of the individual where they recognize, as they might recognize their leg or their arm as an intricate part of them, part of that unity of self. It probably, while I think for many of us, and perhaps I'm speaking beyond my understanding, but I think I hesitate for a moment here, because I think that I'm getting lost in variability. If we consider, on one hand, we have the self. And as I've mentioned, we can think of the bodily part of self, of the components of self, again, of the arms and the legs, but also of the aspects of mind, the qualities of personhood. If we were to take an arm or a leg and cleave it off, that would have quite devastating effects to the human being, to the person. If a part of mind was somehow removed, like in the case of a stroke or a traumatic brain injury, I think it would be another obvious reflection here, or obvious reason that of the individual, of the self, that there is something diminished because of that experience. And although the self, the individual, shares in this type of unity with the mother and the father, there's also an experience of difference. And as we consider the possibilities in which let's say a son or a daughter can relate to their parents, there are some relationships that are good, there are some relationships that are poor, some are filled with love, some are filled with hate. Putting this aside for the moment, going back to the principles of difference and the principles of unity, and of the ways in which the self, the son or the daughter, shares in the principle of difference, while also sharing in the principles of unity. I think we can consider here balance. We can consider moderation. We can consider the appropriateness of one versus the appropriateness of another, depending on the situation or the context. The individuality of the self is important for the son or daughter to grow, to mature, and they must necessarily separate themselves from that sense of unity, or that experience in which the mother and the father has raised the child. But this, of course, is not at the level of planting the seed in the earth and having it nourished and grow. I suppose, to a degree, the nourishment that a child experiences at home when they're young is in part this type of experience. We can say, of a more fundamental level, perhaps at the level of nature and the level of development, I think there is something sacred that happens there in the development of the human being, though I do not wish to reduce it to something that is purely physical or purely material. That is an extremely important component of this equation. There's another way in which we can examine this in terms of unities and difference, as the family unit as being one unit, unity, a thing in and of itself. And that difference can cause a disruption within the family. The family is the fundamental institution of human society, and too much difference within the fundamental units of or fabric of society can lead to its erosion. And so if we had to think, maybe just going off of this, now we have a solid reason to express why the mockery of the Father is important. If it somehow leads to the disruption of that a particular unity within maybe a more fundamental unity that I have yet to discover or think about, but at least in terms of the family unit, the disruption of this, the mockery of it, again going back to our definition, that of a contemptuous, scornful attitude towards one of the primary components of that institution, will promote difference. If the elements of the institution consider the other elements to be lacking, worthless, that they do not support the institution, then the one that feels this way will be actively participating in the crumbling of that foundation. It's interesting that it says the eye that mocks at his father. It's not even the mouth. It's not the tongue. It is something as subtle as the eye, a glance, or where the attention in particular is. The eye that mocks at his father and despises to obey his mother. I think obedience is an important part of this equation as well, partly because of how variable it can be. But it is that type of law that can maintain unity. It is also something that perhaps in the extreme can drive difference, but obedience comes from a submission to authority, which the mother possesses. And that authority is important for many reasons. As I mentioned, part of it is for the maintenance of the unity of the family, but also for the growth and development of the offspring. The eye that mocks at his father and despises to obey his mother, the ravens of the valley shall pick it out, and the young eagles shall eat it. So this is an important symbol, the raven. The raven, a scavenger, a black bird, it's commonly symbolized with death. And it's a curious thing that the raven would be interested in the eye of a living being, unless it interpreted the eye of the living being as something that was other than, unless it was something that was similar to that of death, that of an ending. And given what we've talked about with the end of mockery, or at the end of mockery, or of the end of obedience, of the as it says, the despising of the obedience or obeying of the mother. All of these roads lead towards that sense of absence for which that evil thread has permeated our experience. And I think the raven symbolizes that even among the intuitive beings, there is this understanding that even if something is living, it can occupy a state that is so void of what would otherwise turn a raven off to eating or feasting on flesh, that of the living, that even these things, the fear of perhaps being hurt or subdued by attempting to feast on a living creature that is much larger than itself, for example. That's definitely a good reason, a good instinct to avoid a living creature in that case. But even if the raven didn't have the instinct, because it was so obvious to the raven in that intuitive sense, that the eye was so void of life that it deserved eating, or that it was appropriate to eat, I think it's quite telling of the view that the author places on the eye in this context. The ravens of the valley shall pick it out, and the young eagles shall eat it. So here's a layer to this. What's interesting is that the raven doesn't eat it, it just picks it out. There's this intent, bizarre intent behind it. Now, I don't think that what I said was void necessarily, but it does add a layer to what we are considering. So the raven is still willing to damage the tissue of the living. But the eagle, a bird that usually stalks his prey and kills it, is now taking that position of eating the literally dead tissue. So even the eagle finds within this eye, this distasteful eye, the damaged eye, the evil eye, to be something that needs to be gotten rid of, needs to be consumed. Not consumed so that it perverts the whole, but consumed so that it is transformed into something that is nourishing to the being, instead of something that perpetually exists in the mind of man to destroy man's experience, destroy his societies. There be three things which are too wonderful for me, yet four which I know not: the way of an eagle in the air, the way of a serpent upon a rock, the way of a ship in the midst of the sea, and the way of a man with a maid. So today happens to be a new day, and like usual, a new day, new thoughts. And so I'd like to spend this time introducing this next segment with a prayer. So, dear Lord, I thank you for this day, and I thank you that I can be here. I thank you for the adherence to that centerpiece, that locus of control, that locus of attention, the place for which I can move my mind towards a known goodness, to center myself so I don't stray too far and have the mind to go into the various tributaries of conscious experience that don't have much of a relationship to that true soulful goodness. And while I am by no means perfect at this, I thank you for the moments that I had experienced it today. And as I look forward to the next hour that I will be recording, what I wish from this experience, as perhaps I say often, is to develop a stronger relationship with you. And by this I mean that I may be more firm in my understanding of myself, but also of my position and my purpose here as I have this life to live. And with this I pray in Jesus' name, amen. So let's get to the verse. So verse 18. There be three things which are too wonderful for me, yea, for which I know not. So what comes to me is a desire to understand why exactly we are beginning with this expression again. There are three things which are too wonderful for me, yea, for which I know not. And in verse 15, there are three things that are never satisfied, yea, four things say not, it is enough. So we had, in the first instance, I think more of a negative context. It was attached to the horse leech. And this led us on the exploration of greed, how that relates to the grave and the barren womb, the earth that is not filled with water, the fire that says not, it is enough. All of these things that are either not fulfilling of their purpose or continually asking for more, never satisfied. And there's a close physical relationship to that experience. That there are observable things in the natural world that provide us this principle. Now, when we went over that verse, there was a discussion about why exactly it had mentioned there are three things that are never satisfied. And then, yeah, four things say not. But then going into verse 16, we don't seem to be satisfied, ironically enough, to explain why it says what it says. The grave is one, the barren womb is one, the earth that is not filled with water is one, and fire that says not, it is enough, is four. Now in the previous verse, it seems like there is at least grammatically, there are three things that are never satisfied, yet four things say not. It feels as though the author is saying, I know that there are at least three things, but please don't say that there's a fourth. I can barely tolerate the three that I know. And then he goes to mention four things. It's hard to make heads or tails of that, or if there is a significance in 3 and 4. It seems like there is, because there's another pattern that emerges. The 3 and 4 in verse 18. There be three things which are too wonderful for me, yea, four which I know not. Now we have the way of an eagle in the air as 1, the way of a serpent upon a rock as 2, the way of a ship in the midst of a sea, that's 3, and the way of a man with a maid, that's 4. And it's bizarre to me that he says he knows of these three things. And then he says, but more than 3 I don't know. And so perhaps he's saying that there's one of these 4 that he knows are wonderful, or too wonderful for him, and one that he's uncertain about. And likewise, in verse 15, there are 3 things that are never satisfied, yea, 4 things say not. Perhaps it is as we discussed. I don't think that there is an implication here that he's uncertain about the things that he had mentioned. They seem all pretty straightforward and reasonable, consistent, maybe other than the womb, fairly consistent with greed. But I don't want to spend too much time on the verse that we've already covered. I do want to stay on with this theme and see if there's any significance numerically. Why mention 3? Why mention 4? But as of right now, there does not seem to be a significance, other than for emphasis. Suspense. There be 3 things which are too wonderful for me, yet 4 which I know not. So let's see what we can make of this, drawing conclusions, relationship parallels between the different items here. The way of an eagle in the air. So there are plenty of things, I think, that one can identify with an eagle in the air that are wonderful. The eagle is quite a large bird, and if one is not accustomed to seeing such a large bird, which I am not, there are hawks in the area that I live, but eagles are a larger, much larger animal. And to see an animal that soars so high in the sky, possessing such physical capabilities that are so foreign to us, and it does so gracefully, certainly at the very least it's cause for some pause, and perhaps at most pause and prayer or reflection. It is a wonder how a bird that is so large can fly so high and see so acutely, and see their prey from such a long distance away. Now, as somebody that wears glasses, this is something that perhaps I am envious of. It's wonderful to imagine and experience. The eagle is a symbol of freedom, and I think, although much satirized in our culture, it's reasonable to put to that moniker to the eagle. For there's just something about flight and ease of movement that seems liberating. The way of a serpent upon a rock. Now, a serpent, I think, can be a snake. Perhaps it can also be seen as a lizard. But a rock is a hard surface. It is not something that is not a place for which a serpent can hide. If it is to slither over it, or to hurry over it in whatever way that it does, we can see its exact movements. Whether it be a snake or a lizard, there is something mesmerizing about the way that reptiles move about. A snake especially, because its long body is that continuous muscle. But I suppose I should ask the question, how are these things similar in their wonder? We could say that their foreignness to our experience is a wonder. That if we flew like the bird, or crawled like the serpent, perhaps we would not find this fascinating. We would not find it wonderful. And also in both of these situations, we are talking about the way. Now, the way in my mind is a reference to behavior, to movement, to judgment, perhaps. And I think in this domain, in the domain of judgment, there's more of an interesting environment for observation. When I was younger, I had a bunch of reptiles in various terrariums. And the thing that was interesting was not so much their movements, which I suppose is to a degree interesting, but their movements are interesting because of their goal-directed behavior. It was interesting to see how they hunted crickets when I put them in their cages. It was interesting to see how they spent most of their time. When I think about the birds outside, I feel like it is interesting to hear their calls, the different ways in which they sound. But also, if one catches a glimpse of them in the tree, it's interesting to see how they move to and fro. And I ask, why do they move in such a way? There's a Platonic comparison, at least I think it's a Platonic comparison, I barely remember it, that mentions this bird. Or maybe it's not a Platonic comparison, I think it might be proverbial. That questions the movement of birds, about the purposefulness of the movement therein. And it leads to an interesting reflection about the nature of being and how goal-directed beings make decisions, and how that may appear to a being that is at a higher level than it, and then yet thinking about a being that is of a higher level than us, how it might see us. And in one sense, our observation of birds can be quite excited by the complexity of their behavior, but also probably at some level we understand that complexity of behavior does not approach the complexity of man. The way of an eagle in the air, the way of a serpent upon a rock. Now, the other thing that's of comparison here, their behavior, but also the environments that they live in. The rock, initially, I had conceptualized as maybe a resting surface, a basking surface for a serpent. But I think this is more of the environment, just like the air that the eagle travels in. It's not a temporary structure for it. It's the environment through which it spends its productive energies, going from one place to another. Something that has occurred to me after reading the first two, but now thinking about the two that we will encounter next, the sense of mysticism or wonder that is associated to these things leaves us with a lot of breathing room to explore and to reflect. We can go so many different places. The Proverbs have an interesting way of doing this sort of thing. And at once, I feel like I'm reminded of many things. I feel like I'm reminded of the Psalms. I'm reminded about the general trope of the man that finds himself aware within his mind, within a darkened room, stumbling around, trying to figure out exactly where he is, who he is, what his purpose is. All the while, he has to survive in this environment. He has to determine what he needs. Thankfully, his needs are somewhat hardwired to him, so he understands to a degree of what he must do. But as the questions add up, the layers of complexity about reason and purpose build within him, within his mind, so too does his desire to understand his surroundings, to understand the way of things, to understand the way of himself. And it's often the things that he finds in the environment and reflects on his own nature that he comes to certain things of certain methods, modes, or ideas for which he can understand where he is in this space. And it's by this way of relating to things, I think, that at least to a degree, understanding is born. And by this, I wonder, perhaps there's no need to have some deep existential thought about an eagle that flies in the sky. But all the same, thinking about these creatures and thinking about the variability of experience that they have, thinking about how they too, although they may lack the higher level awareness, they're so purpose-driven. And I have to wonder of the serpent and of the eagle, what would they do if they possessed this self-awareness? But perhaps more interestingly, we may say that what drives them is their instincts. And we may say that their instincts come from a gradual period of evolution for which the environment has shaped them. They have reacted to changes in the environment. And over many, many years, this changes the being of the organism. But at some level, we have to ask ourselves about the cause of this purpose. And out of all of the variability of both purposeful organisms like the serpent and the eagle in their respective environments, we could take any object and wonder why it has come to be, what has caused it to come to be. And out of the exceedingly many physical causes, mechanical causes, there will be left still questions of uncertainty and emptiness, because certain fundamental questions are not solved. The way of a ship in the midst of the sea. We can think of how the ship is designed, how it interacts with the waves. I think about a turbulent sea, perhaps during a period of storm, for which the ship, in its motion, is tossed about. I think about navigation and the skill required there. I think about the loneliness, the dedication and the discipline of the sailors involved. Because of course I'm not thinking about a modern vessel. I'm thinking about an old wooden structure. And there too I think about their motivations. They find themselves moving just as the eagle or as the serpent does. And they've created this extension of themselves for which they can navigate new environments. The eagle, I suppose, possesses a degree of this. and so may too the serpent, but man altogether, to traverse such a large distance, is different altogether. And the way of a man with a maid, I think about the passions. I think about the drive towards unification. And how subtle the depth of that sort of innate intrinsic drive, and then the more purposeful, self-reflective, forward-thinking experience is. That a man can approach a woman and have all these goals in mind, and establish a strong foundation, and build an empire, rear children, and all this sort of thing. A man can also be controlled by his desire, by his sexual appetite, and he may do the same. He may find some unity with that woman, but all the while developing it on uncertain foundations. While the marriage may hold, it offers more of an animalistic type of experience, something that is not necessarily rationally understood or reflected on, but just sort of experienced. And they are drawn through the flows of life, just as an eagle or a serpent may be. Such is the way of an adulterous woman. She eats and wipes her mouth, and says, I have done no wickedness. So we are given a way of being, that of the adulterer. And we are given some subjective experiences through which we know well the eating and wiping of the mouth. So what can we make of this? So the act of eating in this situation, I would have to imagine, is representative of the act of the sexual intercourse between this woman and another married person. And so when she is done, that wiping of the mouth, that is that signal that as when we eat food, we want to clean ourselves from having the food being present on our mouths. Perhaps we do this because of some personal discomfort at leaving it there. We have an idea of personal hygiene and cleanliness that we would like to maintain. But also for outside appearances. We wouldn't want somebody to look upon our face and have it be completely muddied by foods of all different sorts from our meal that we just had. We think it is improper to do so. It is rude, in fact, to do so, because it perverts, it distracts the attention. She eats and wipes her mouth and says, I have done no wickedness. So just like eating, it's a standard practice. It is something that we all must do. If we don't, we perish. And there's an etiquette that's associated with that. And to compare the behavior of the adulterer to this innocuous, typical, essential behavior, I think means to suggest that within the heart of this woman, within the deepest recesses of her mind, she believes that her behavior is justified. Just as one must satiate themselves through food to sustain themselves, so the satiation of the sexual appetite they view in the same manner, regardless of the oaths that they have took with their spouses. And if I pause for a moment just to think about a few things, just thinking about my own experience here, there are times that I feel that I wish to say, and I don't work in the environment where this is possible, perhaps. Maybe in a way it's possible, but I suppose it depends on me. I wish to say, let's cut the bullshit. And I don't necessarily mean that in a comical manner. I mean it quite intentionally. And within this cutting of the nonsense, the removal of it, I think it provides one to see some things a little bit more clearly, or at least occupy the headspace for which it is necessary to see something a little bit more clearly. And when I think about this woman, the adulterous woman, who has a particular way of being, has a particular belief structure, she does not think that the institution of marriage that she engaged in is anything worth keeping sacred. She may have some desire to keep it in place, but keeping it sacred, surely not. And it just seems like one of those situations where at some point somebody just has to say, let's cut the nonsense. Let's talk about some real issues. Why is it the case that such a foundational thing as marriage is being belittled, it is being trampled on? Why is it that you have agreed to unify with a person, to bear children, and raise them within a family structure and develop that structure so that the children can develop and become seers of that which is good? Why has that been corrupted by the sexual appetite? And perhaps that question is too soft. Now, I mentioned that I think about my own experience here. Sometimes I feel that in my own interactions with people during the day, during the week, there are times that I can be so passive, and we all have a duty to perform and a responsibility to carry, or a burden to carry. And when I fail to do it, I think that I come up short. I may have the desire to do good, but I cannot follow through with it. When I was a child, I had this experience of taking in a deep breath, like a yawn. And I know, we all know intuitively what that feeling of a yawn is, that we take in such a breath, and we are satisfied by doing so. Now imagine a situation in which you take a breath, as in a yawn, but you can never get to the point where you're satisfied. That deep inhalation brings you to that excited state, physical state, whatever it is that we all feel, but we come up short and come up lacking. Imagine this extended out into important experiences in life. I'm sure we all have these. It's just a part of being human. It does us well, it does me well to work on it and to correct it, but nonetheless, they happen. And there's such a strong relationship between this experience, even though it's not completely paralleled, and the ontological adulterous woman. that I have to wonder about the nature of desire. For we can, even if we, regardless of the scale that we look at, if we look at it at the scale for which one willfully perverts the original purpose of a foundational institution for society, or if somebody by their weakness fails to uphold a duty or responsibility, and they know that, much like the yawn, that they will not get there. We have the situation of the former, in which there is an unknowing, especially if the person feels that they are not wicked, there is an unknowing quality to it, where the process of transformation for somebody that is unknowing surely must be quite difficult. It creates a situation of necessity for divine intervention, I think. A person that is aware, I think, is in a much better position to solve it. It doesn't mean that they will. Like in my case, of the things that I know that are problematic, that need to be solved, I wonder in those moments where I know that it has failed, and I admit that there has been some wickedness, perhaps, that by my arrogance or my ignorance, whatever, I failed to rise to the occasion. In the absence of actually doing something about it, in the off time, in the off hours, for which something productive can be done to solve the situation, I don't think there is much difference between the adulterous woman and the person who fails and does not choose to rectify their failures. Now, perhaps there's a difference in degree, but still there's a transgression there nonetheless. For 3 things the earth is disquieted, and for 4 which it cannot bear. For a servant when he reigns, and a fool when he is filled with meat, for an odious woman when she is married, and an handmaid that is heir to her mistress. So let's talk about the first. This occupies 3 verses, verses 21 through 23. So I think it's fundamental to understand what it means for the earth to be disquieted. So firstly, to define the word disquiet, if I Google the definition, it means a feeling of anxiety or worry, to make someone worried or uneasy. So an interesting thing to attribute this sort of experience to the earth that is something that we consider as material, organized, but non-purposeful, non-heavenly. Those 2 fundamental differences, the heaven and the earth. For one, we have more of that productive, generative information, meaningful information. And of the earth, we have something that is more stagnant, not purposeless per se, but stagnant. It requires the heavenly in order for it to become utilized, in order for its potential to be harnessed, for that creative process to occur. So today happens to be a new day, new thoughts. And so I'd like to open this with a prayer. It'll be a prayer / self-reflection. So, dear Lord, I thank you for this day, and I thank you that I can be here. I feel of late the conversations are starting the same. that I'm thinking about my attention. I'm thinking about how I am throughout the day. And I think that this is a good process, a good procedure. Sometimes I wish I can speed up the process, for which my mind is always readily recognizing good things, and I'm always moving towards you. But there's something about my weakness and my fatigue that carries on, that if work ends, maybe I feel, for whatever reason, a couple hours of just absence and nothingness. And it's not necessarily the feeling that is bad, it's the inaction that I think is bad. And I pray that the activation energy required for this is something that is sufficient for, well, maybe I should put it in different terms. I pray that the activation energy to move beyond the stagnation, to be something that ought not to be shallow, because it should arouse my passions. It should be like a torrent that I'm about to go over a waterfall. There should be some danger in it. There should be some struggle in it. This is how good experiences are formed. But I find that what I struggle with is making my way over the threshold. I feel that in my weaker moments, I am in front of the gates of heaven, let's say. But I cannot make it up and over them. Not up and over like I'm trying to break in, but up and over in the sense that I must do something quite significant. It could be significant to God or myself. It doesn't have to be world-changing, of course. Significant enough for some personal goal and for some listened advice. And so I pray that moving forward into the weekend, since today is a Friday evening, that tomorrow is something that I can make special, that I can put my best foot forward, and I can set aside the weakness that I've learned in the more passive phases of my life. And with this I pray, in Jesus' name, amen. Now, I can't quite remember during that last recording if I went over the topic of being disquieted. I vaguely remember mentioning it, and you'd think I would remember it better, given that it was not that long ago. But sometimes these sorts of things take twists and turns that are difficult to remember. And sometimes the productive thing is to pave out a new path and to begin anew. So I want to discuss this earth being disquieted before moving on. Disquiet is defined as a feeling of anxiety or worry. Now, I do remember thinking it strange to attribute anxiety or worry to the earth, as I know that I've discussed that I conceptualize the earth as the sandbox for more purposeful, agentic action on top of it. But to say that this substructure, if that's a good way to put it, I'm not sure, is disquieted, if it feels something anxious or worry, how exactly then do we conceptualize it? Because we're contributing agency to material that doesn't have agency in the way that we commonly think of. I suppose that there's an element or a possible road for that argument about the earth being occupied with everything other than the human being, so that would include agents in the animal kingdom. But this isn't really the path that I want to go down. I think it's saying something, well, at least we can think about something that is a little bit more sophisticated than just the earth being disinterested, unorganized information, because it is certainly not unorganized. But if it is all part of this purposeful system, it has a degree, a probability, in a particular direction of a purpose. Of course, there is a bunch of exchange between fundamental parts of things. But all the same, these fundamental parts, as they build or as they stay as they are, have behaviors. And they have, by those behaviors, by their inclinations, they have interest, I would say. Now, to say that it's the same interest as man, of course it is not. We are built upon layers of this substrate, and we have developed our own concept of self on top of it. So now I feel like I'm tasked with trying to understand at what level I should investigate. Because I feel like at one level, we can try to draw some parallel or to a conclusion to the substrate that immediately surrounds us and how that's affected by certain things that we do or participate in. Some of the experiences that would otherwise look like coincidences, there are many of these things, and there are many of situations in which people attribute to them divine significance. I'm not sure if I can comment on that experience or situation. But I do think I can comment on the stratified layer of the earth. Now, at some level, since we are molded of the earth, but made in the image of God, I think that we can say that we are operating on the earthly substrate, something I've mentioned, but operating on the earthly substrate. And because we operate on the earthly substrate, our participation affects not just us and the lower parts of us, but also the physical environment around us. Now, it may seem difficult to understand, but also in a sense it's quite straightforward, and it's difficult to see in other ways. There's an obvious effect if the mind is wound up in some procedure or process that is disadvantageous to long-term survival or towards long-term well-being. I think it can be said that many in our society, and perhaps even myself, we have the survival dimension figured out, but what we don't have is the well-being dimension figured out. For a servant when he reigns, and a fool when he is filled with meat. So we have to remember that we are thinking about the earth being disquieted. Let's think about basic information that is necessary for productive human flourishing. We can say that this applies to information that goes into forming the human being, but also in shaping and forming the human mind. This is the natural environment that's in front of us. It's the way that we manipulate the natural environment in front of us. I find it difficult to imagine aspects of life where human society has not penetrated, but modified, had his sight on at some point, whether it be the natural landscape or the materials that he finds in it. All of these are moved by his purposes towards some means or towards some ends, facilitated by his means. Now that's pretty obvious, it would seem. But if we consider the servant that now reigns, that is in a position of authority, but they remain a servant in a dispositional sense, that this is not a person that was kept down because of, or rather, this was not a person that was incidentally held down, and that there was something within this person that was capable of leading. Of course, in that case, the servant would transform into a leader. What we are saying here is that the servant that remains a servant is put in a position that is commensurate to a leader, and there is this mismatch, a nominalization for which trust and strong institutions are no longer being established in the society. And I think that there's a lot of that now, but just because there is, it doesn't mean that we should despair. In some sense, it's difficult at this stage to know exactly how things are going to play out, but it appears that we are getting closer to something that will change all of our experiences. And I hope that whoever may find this in the future, that you realize the degree to which it affected us when it happened, or even just before it happened. Of course, as I've mentioned, many of us are quite satisfied in the Western world. We have our needs met. If we fail, it is largely because of our own failures. Of course, there is a new feudal, techno-feudal society developing, but for the most part, we maintain healthy liberties. And we remain somewhat mobile within our classes. But our wars are becoming, I hesitate to say, because of course there are always wars that are violent, but the war zone is increasingly in our minds, and the effects of which in a non-religious age have gone on a deaf mind, in the sense that the material mind has difficulty seeing the spiritual diseases that may find it. And as a result, we have many that are beginning to form these beings that are combative. We're experiencing now a change in a global order, such that the chains that prevented these beings from inhabiting us was restrained to a better degree. But now we've returned, as I think is necessary, to a place of strong independent identities, but also independent identities that must communicate effectively with one another. Since our laws are in a bit of flux, let's say. Our interests are in a bit of flux. And a fool, when he is filled with meat. Now the servant who leads but maintains his servant status and qualities of mind I suppose can be thought of in a sense as a fool, but a fool is one of these typical figures in the Proverbs. The fool comes back often. The fool occupies a place in mind that is, I think, present in all of us. It is a failure to recognize information that is meaningful and to, I think, move it in a good direction. And most of that is because of willful ignorance or lack of attention, lack of effort. And this causes what we might call foolish decisions. Decisions that under calmer situations would have been, and cooler heads, would have been solved and not created farther problems. Now, a fool, when he is filled with meat, now if a fool is not filled with meat, then it probably means he's hungry. If he's hungry, he's probably concerned with his hunger. And so perhaps his foolish decisions are mitigated by the necessity of food, of finding food. But when he is filled, then he has the opportunity to explore his mind and to say his mind. And a foolish person at heart will say foolish things if they are given the opportunity. And as I think about it now, I've said plenty of foolish things. And so the only reason I say that is to say that I'm not innocent of the foolish behavior. But the fool, on a larger scale, surely, when he is given, much like we are now, enough to eat, if the mind runs foolishly, it will result in consequences quite severe. For an odious woman when she is married. So the word odious is defined as extremely unpleasant or repulsive. Remembering the earth being disquieted. I think about, almost imagistically, the idea of having offspring. And the idea that is implanted into flesh, let's say. That there is the idea, there is the behavior, there is this process of growth, and then birth and continual growth. The odious woman, at least in my mind, is a wrench into the gears of that whole process. It undeniably gets between the productive generation of the small human being, the organization of the simpler parts of earthly existence, into something that is can be beautiful, can be prosperous. Something extremely unpleasant. What kind of an environment would a desert, B for an oak tree or weeping willow that requires a lot of water. It would not grow. It would not be possible. And I think it can be said that of an oak tree or a willow that finds itself, a seed finding itself in the desert, we could say that from the perspective of the seed or of the oak tree, willow tree, it is extremely unpleasant. That is the environment. And surely it would be that these trees and their seeds, and where maybe the animals carry their seeds, are far from such environments because they are repulsed by it. They cannot survive there. Now there's a more fundamental direction. I think that this, maybe not more fundamental, but there's a place that this verse draws our attention to that I have yet to mention. For an odious woman when she is married. When she is married, not when she has children, but when she is married. Now we think about the institution of marriage, the bringing together of two families, two people, into one, into a unity. And I think that that project is an environment in and of itself. We spoke of the environment for which the child would grow up in. Now we speak of the environment that supports, or that facilitates, or that binds the unity of the marriage, of the husband and the wife. And I can see how, in this situation, the same analogy will still apply, in the sense that this odious woman, the extremely unpleasant woman, will bring that aspect of herself into the unity and will necessarily infect her partner. And it's quite hard to have two things that are bound together when its component parts wishes that they were separated. Now to the earth, we can imagine any sorts of distortions. Even up to war, we can imagine if marriages fail regularly in a society, or that the institution is not structured in such a way that affords productive environments for families, that we can see war as a consequence. War that develops because of some asymmetry, some act of arrogance, perhaps. Whatever the case that might be, I think we can trace many different conclusions, many different lines of thought. I think the next part of this verse can also be an extension, if we think about two equal parts to that unity in the marriage. When we think about the next, a handmaid that is heir to her mistress, we can also think about the unity. Maybe the mistress, it depends on what level we want to see it, but perhaps the mistress can be seen as the woman of wealth and has various subservient elements that go on to support her status or her structure, whatever, her identity. When we take an inferior element, the handmaid, and we draw her to the surface, what does she know of filling that role? Much like we had mentioned earlier with the servant that rules. It is clear at that point that the identity of what was will have changed. It is unlikely that the handmaid will carry on to the same degree as the mistress had. So I want to say that today is a new day. I'll begin this with a prayer and then resume where I left off. We're almost done in terms of this episode, and we'll continue next time with the the follow-up. But dear Lord, I thank you for this day, and I thank you that I can be here. Today is a Sunday, and this weekend has been a mixed bag. It's been productive, filled with some unproductive moments, but for the most part I've kept steady and kept moving, which I'm thankful for. I'm thankful that there has been progress on the aspect of my mind that is given to absence, that wishes to crawl inside of itself, to keep itself preoccupied, or to dissociate itself for whatever reason, so it doesn't have to deal with the environment that is immediate to it. Of course, there is really no way to hide. The only way to hide is to shut off the being itself, to shut off the normal functions of the self, which is a total disengagement with the world and with people that I care about. And I'm thankful for progress on this front, of reversing this. And I pray that in this process, since I found it to be at times quite painful to maintain attention when the mind wishes for anything else but to be present and to be active, I pray that the virtues that are necessary, the honesty, the awareness, the discipline, find me, or that I may reach for them, and by extension I may reach for you, so that I can see them, and I can take action by my own regard. And so with this I pray in Jesus' name, amen. So like I said, I'm close to the end of this. There's a situation, maybe not a situation, it sounds negative. There's a comment that came up earlier today when I was at my friend's house, sharing a dinner with them. It was a quick passing comment, but it was something that's been on my mind, something that we've talked about. The idea of the servant, the handmaid, falls in this category. The exact position of this. Now there's a type of person, maybe there's a disposition of mind that is inclined towards feeling towards the underclass. And in many respects, it is understandable to devote so much feeling, and by extension attention, to them. But the feeling and the attention goes to a particular place. It goes to their status as being under. And it's almost, it becomes almost a reflection on the quality of that underness, that one can be a subordinate to another, as something that, from a standpoint of justice, is totally and absolutely unjust. While there may be aspects of their mind that understands that a blanket statement like that is not practical and it doesn't lead to the truth, the degree of emotion often blinds the mind such that it believes, at least for the moment, that the subject, the one that serves, is somehow needing of something to rectify that discrepancy in status. I think there's many elements that we can identify that would be indicative of the status difference, not just one thing. But by the same token, there are plenty of things, conversely, that we can identify that are probably foundational for which, if the mind chose to see a relationship with difference in the sense of one person being below another, that it is possible for this difference to be unjust. And it is possible that what is denied in this situation is the soul or the humanity of the individual in question, that is, the servant in this case. So there's a bit of a nuance to understanding this. Context is extremely important. So hopefully that I didn't go off on a tangent that was completely nonsensical there, but I think it's important to understand that point about the possibilities of mind and heart. I myself find myself subject at times to my heart that moves myself into something so strongly that I find myself angry at nothing and trying to argue based on my feelings and not necessarily anything else. And it's not to say that feelings are not important. They are an important part of our experience that ought to be tempered and judiciously directed so that they can irrigate the proper lands. But anyway, I say this in the context that in all human societies, and in all societies in the future, we will have these differences between people. We will have the categories for which we would say that one person is above another. Some may be good and some may be bad. But of the ones that we say are bad, like in this situation, sort of like almost like a nepotism, such that there's a person that had put in all the productive effort, the discipline, the time, and the attention throughout their life to achieve some degree of status. Again, multiple elements that go into what status is, but nonetheless, when we think about the handmaid, we're thinking about somebody that has not put forward or has not developed the skills necessary to uphold a household like the mistress has. And so by that, what can we say? The order that was necessary to bind all of those things such that whatever we wish, in this example, a household, maybe some land, to hold that together. Now, a good handmaiden, for some reason, I think about Batman and his relationship to Alfred. Alfred is the butler who, in some sense, helped raise Bruce Wayne. But he is the sort of righteous servant. He is somebody that, on the flip side, you would probably want to inherit the house. He's somebody that would take care of it. He would be something that has the skills to enhance that the opportunity that was given him. So in closing, I think it could be said that if we consider the principal difference, the difference that is true that separates the mistress from the handmaid, within that we would find some qualities, characteristics of their personalities that would necessarily make this difference. Now, it wouldn't be just the characteristics of their personality, let's say, but of situation, of time, of natural course, perhaps. So what I think I would like to keep in mind here moving forward, when we see the servant again, or we see some manner of difference, like we do with the handmaid and the mistress, that type of comparison, I think it'll be fruitful territory to perhaps go into particular examples There's so much fruitful territory to be had in the Proverbs. But to discuss maybe in a little bit more detail the matter of difference, the way it can be transformed, the way in which it can be relatively difficult to change, the way that it can be more readily changed, the type of intervention that would be necessary to lead to some transformative experience, such that a person can rise or fall between that sort of ranking structure, informal as it might be, unspoken as it might be. So, keeping this in mind, we will carry this with us. But I think I'm going to end this episode here, and I'll continue next time with verse 24, it seems. Another one of these verses: there be 4 things which are little upon the earth, but they are exceedingly wise. So until next time.